Thank you so much, Laxman. As you have said, I'm Uwezo. I work for TF Found as a global SGBV, focusing on transforming masculinity. And for this particular session, I'm also a member of the Men Engage GBV working group. So welcome everyone to this session. And during this session, we'll be in the format of conversation and dialogues, which means we want people to participate as speakers will not speak for their own, but they would like to engage with you. And during the session, we'll emphasize candid reflection and idea sharing on collective reflections, dialogues, and strategizing on the effort to transform masculinities to prevent and end sexual gender-based violence in its full spectrum of online or offline spaces and gender sexual identity, gender or sexual identities. So these are the kind of focus of this we will focus on during this session. And the attempt will be to cover some topics, and among them we'll offer new perspectives and strategies that would build on past work while reaching different audiences, such as institutional actors and young men in various institutional and non-institutional settings, the tensions in the field of gender-based violence prevention, including the balance between systemic and individual change, and the challenge of addressing violence against different vulnerable communities. So the other point, it will be about key strategies to ensure that these efforts for addressing systemic and transformative changes than the heavy individual behavior change models and practices in the field. And lastly, we'll talk about, we'll cover the current tendency and possible challenges of technology facilitate violence to create silos, and also the importance of maintaining a broad approach to gender-based violence, including considerations around language and accountability. So as I said during the, when I took on, it's this space, it will be really a kind of reflective, but also a conversation. So everyone is encouraged to participate, to collaborate, to ask questions, and to share some reflections during the different sessions. So I'm going to invite Humberto, who will be introducing our different speakers for this session. Over to you, Humberto.
Thank you so much, Wezo, for that introduction, and welcome to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're looking forward to having this dialogue with you, and to getting your comments and your insights and questions as well. So my name is Umberto Carollo. I'm the CEO of White Ribbon. I'm based in Toronto, in Canada. I also sit on the board of directors for the Global Men Engage Alliance, and I too am a member of the gender-based violence working group that has put on these wonderful sessions. So this session builds on the dialogue that was started in the previous two sessions, and we are joined by four really amazing speakers, panelists that I'm now going to invite for them to introduce themselves. So let's start with Nats. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Umberto. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie. I work with Raising Voices. Just for those of you who are not familiar with Raising Voices is a feminist organization based in Uganda, working to prevent violence against women and violence against children. And currently, I'm calling in from Kampala. And lovely to be here. And back to you, Umberto.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nats. Welcome. And next, welcome to Sergio. Bom dia, Sergio.
Bom dia, Humberto. Bom dia a todas as pessoas aqui presentes. Estou muito feliz com o convite e agradeço a todas as pessoas que me fizeram chegar aqui, inclusive as tradutoras para o inglês, do qual eu não domino a língua inglesa. Eu resido no Brasil, no estado de São Paulo, e trabalho com homens autores de violência, com projetos de prevenção, com projetos de educação no meio corporativo e entidades. Eu faço assessoria em políticas públicas e gestão de projetos na área de enfrentamento à violência contra a mulher. No atual momento, eu sou um indivíduo não governamental. Eu não tenho uma entidade, mas eu presto assessoria a várias entidades.
Wonderful. Obrigado, Sérgio. Bem-vindo. And so next I'm going to invite Calliope to introduce themselves. Hi, Calliope.
Hi, Umberto. Thank you so much. And hi, colleagues. Welcome to this very exciting dialogue, I have to say. My name is Calliope Mikiru. I'm the chief of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls section at UN Women. I'm currently based in New York, the US, and I'm leading the global portfolio on ending violence against women and girls from UN Women. We do a lot of work on prevention and addressing the root causes of violence, including through the engagement of men and boys, mainly at institutional level, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. And also we're having a lot of responses, interventions, survivor-centered, with the main focus on access to justice. So institutional entry points there that I'm going to introduce a little bit later. And the last few years, the challenges of the technology platforms and the online violence we see is an area that we are addressing very intensively and intentionally as UN Women across the continuum of violence, online, offline. So thank you for including us in this important dialogue.
Wonderful. And thank you for joining us. And I look forward to hearing about your work. And last but not least, Nikki. Hi, Nikki. Please introduce yourself. Welcome.
Hi, Umberto, and hello, everybody. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. Really nice to see you all for this exciting discussion. Really honoured to be part of it. I'm based in Oxford in the UK, and I'm part of Men Engage Europe. I'm also an independent consultant and a senior fellow at Equimundo. And a lot of my work in the last few years has been around care and unpaid care, and particularly researching and writing around state of the world's fathers. So very much on the prevention side. Really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nikki. And off we go. What an amazing panel that has joined us today and an amazing audience as well. So as we start our dialogue, please feel free to use the chat box and share your insight, your questions, and later we'll have an opportunity to take those up as well. So we're going to start with about 30 minutes of conversation between the five of us, and then there will be some time for questions and answers and some reflections from the audience. And then we'll give the panelists an opportunity to respond to those as well. And then we're going to also end with some final thoughts from Amrita from Will. So looking forward to this conversation. This is amazing topics to talk about. So moving from individual engagements to systemic change, how do we do that? Looking at the tensions that exist within this field of work, looking at the intersections between new forms of gender and sexual-based violence, particularly those that happen online through platforms and technology, and how those impact day-to-day life and our communities, our homes and our families. Looking at how we continue to root this work in feminist and human rights principles, which is so important, and also looking at so many other intersections and and good examples of work and strategy. So we're going to hear from our speakers on all of those topics and more. So let's get this going with the first question being eliminating and ending sexual and gender-based violence is not a new area of work. We've been doing this for a while, but there's a huge level of learning from the past that we can build on for sure, including the efforts to engage men and boys in this field. Lots of lessons learned, lots of good things that have happened, but lots of challenges along the way as well. So what are some of the promising shifts or innovations that you're seeing, and particularly within the spectrums of online and offline spaces as well as gender identity? So what are some of the key shifts that we're seeing in our area of work? So let's start again with Nats. Nats, are you with us? Please unmute yourself if you are. Okay. Then let's go to Sergio.
Ok. Vivemos numa nova ágora, né? Num espaço público onde o público é privado. Ou seja, o privado começou a se tornar muito público. Não existe mais esse limite de público-privado das nossas redes sociais. Ontem, às 22 horas, às 10 horas da noite, eu estava trabalhando, uma coisa muito interessante antes das redes sociais, antes do mundo da internet. E acho que isso se repercute no tema trazido pela equipe coordenadora. O que temos que falar hoje desse espaço online e desse espaço onde a gente vem aprendendo, principalmente, a conduzir uma proposta de resistir à crescente epidemia da violência contra a mulher, à violência de gênero, à violência sexual. Como administrar essas tensões entre eu tenho acesso a recursos, mas eu também sou acessado por vários outros lugares. O que eu tenho feito no meu trabalho é um processo de descolonização, de decolonização dos valores. Romper com os séculos de uma educação patriarcal que ensina que o homem é detentor do poder e que, principalmente, o homem é invulnerável. E, de certa forma, esse espaço cibernético reforça essa invulnerabilidade masculina. Eu digo que, nas nossas ações, nos treinamentos, nas capacitações, o mais importante não é individualizar essa ação masculina em relação à violência. O mais importante é entender como essa ação perversa se tornou coletiva, fluida, dentro de um universo onde hoje os algoritmos levam a uma situação de colapso da ideia de privacidade. Eu pratico dentro dos meus grupos uma tentativa de desconstruir que homem tem que ser uma performance de alguma coisa projetada para ser mais do que outro homem e, por consequente, mais que outra mulher. A primeira estratégia que eu lido com essa pergunta tão cara, tão complexa, e aqui eu vou, pelo menos, compartilhar com todas as pessoas aqui, é que desnaturalizar essa ideia do poder, da força e da dominação. É transvalorizar essas ideias e esses comportamentos onde o homem, né, por meio do acesso a recurso, a tecnologia, compreende que ele pode dominar outra pessoa na sua proximidade e também na sua extensão. E principalmente, eu procuro me relacionar ou trazer aos grupos onde eu coordeno, incorporar as políticas de gênero, a compreensão de se relacionar com o outro, com a alteridade. É muito importante para o mundo tecnológico ensinar a lidar com a alteridade. Pelo menos é o que eu acho, Humberto.
Thank you so much, Sergio, for that great start and that important call to decolonize the work with men and boys. Thank you. Let's go to Calliope next.
Thank you so much, Umberto. And Sergio he has already very beautifully laid out so many different concepts that we're going to examine today. But let me get a little bit back to what you asked, Umberto, about what have we been learning so far about the so-called engagement of men and boys in prevention work and ending violence against women and girls. I would like to say first that what we have been learning for offline settings, and let's see how we can apply them in online spaces, is first of all that we cannot have a program or intervention engaging men and boys being in isolation without being a part of a broader and more comprehensive approach to overall prevention of violence against women and girls. When we're working as UN Women at country level, we're working at multiple levels. We're working at institutional level and trying to make sure that the engagement of men and boys is and addressing transforming patriarchal masculinities, they become a part of policies, a part of laws. Having, for example, parental leave that men have to take as well, for example, is also a part of engaging men and boys in addressing social norms and stereotypes. So we try to work a lot with institutions to address the laws and policies and engage in having these transforming patriarchal masculinities from within. What we have been learning as well is that we cannot have just awareness raising campaigns addressing men and boys in isolation. This doesn't work. We need to have what we call gender transformative approaches when we work with men and boys. And what we have been learning is that we need to work on programs that they get into the heart of the issue, which is the power imbalances between men and women, boys and girls, and really work to challenge the stereotypes, the attitudes, the beliefs that they have created these power imbalances. So when we talk about engagement of men and boys, it's also how do we address the issues of childcare, of household work, for example. These are important notions. And also what we have been learning is that we cannot work in isolated groups, separately with men and boys, separately with women and girls. We have learned that we need to have constructive dialogues across and discussion not only about ending violence against women and girls, but issues that they concern the communities, And very often these issues, they intersect with issues of social and economic injustice. And what does it mean for issues concerning the communities as such? I think it's important. I would like to finish by saying that, and I can put it in the chat, you may be familiar, colleagues, about the respect framework. So there we have different promising practices on social norms, transforming social norms, and under that strategy, we have a lot of promising practices and programs for engagement of men and boys. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And regarding online spaces, I think there is a question later that I would like to get a little bit deeper into, maybe later when we continue our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Calliope. And, it's a great reminder. We need to use a holistic approach to engaging men and boys. And the personal is political and the political is personal. We have to do this work and work hard to change the systems that have created this inequality and this violence. Thank you for that reminder. Let's go to Nikki next.
Yes, I think we may have lost Nachnet, but I couldn't see her online. But yeah, I just wanted to take a little step back and think about, I'm just so conscious of the difficult context in so many parts of the world that are going on at the moment, with conflict, with climate change, with migration, with all the things going around AI, with economic precarity, and the fact that in many countries gender equality is not only not going forward, but is stalling. So it feels like this work is becoming more and more important. And I'd like just for a second to take a moment's breath for all those who are suffering violence at the moment in their homes or online or in their streets, in their communities and in their countries, because it feels really, really important to remember that. Yeah. And then thinking about, we've got a number of questions, more detailed questions later on, but kind of in the bigger picture, I was trying to think before this meeting about those bigger picture things. And I think there's so much more of an acknowledgement than there was a few years ago about the links between online and offline violence. And that feels really, really important, particularly in the context of kind of AI and what that's going to do to both those spaces. I think there's increasing acknowledgement of the link between individual and structural change, that we can't have one without the other. And I know we've had lots of examples in the last two webinars that you ran, and I think we'll have some more today. The importance as well, I think, in the last few years, recognizing that this all starts so young, and that actually we have to educate boys and girls very, very young about what care means, about what violence means, that violence isn't acceptable. And again, there've been lots of good examples of work with boys and with girls. I think there's been an increase in bystander work, recognizing that peer groups are so important, whether online or offline, and that we're all in our own bubbles, but we can feed off each other. And there's been some interesting research showing that men who come into online spaces which are relatively harmless can quickly get into places which are quite violent. Then I think there's been some interesting work around work with leaders, whether that's churches, mosques, temples, religious leaders, or leaders in the community, recognizing that they can also make a difference. My own work and that of Ekimundo and Men Care and others around fatherhood and care as a way into care. The antidote to violence, I think, is not non-violence, but it's care, and therefore thinking about centering care is an important part of the discussion around violence. And then building alliances across specialisms, across sectors. Feminists have been doing this work on violence for decades, as have many organizations working with men. So we're not starting from scratch. We're not the first people to be doing this, as you were saying at the beginning, Umberto. So how can we build better alliances, get better funded, and really think about this kind of cross-sectorally? More to say, but I'll say that later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. We shall remember and we shall pledge to take action against this violence. Thank you for reminding us to take a life cycle approach, right? To start young and to move on to, later stages, fatherhood, looking at leadership as well. Those are key approaches. So thank you so much. Nats, glad to have you back. I understand your internet is a little wonky, but let's hope it works. Over to you. We're still on the first question about what are some of the promising shifts that you've seen in the work with engaging men and boys? Over to you.
Thank you, Umberto, and apologies, everyone. I had issues with internet. Maybe if we look back in the past decade or so, there are a lot of encouraging developments that are geared towards prevention of violence against women, or addressing violence against women, or broadly creating more equitable society for everyone. And some of the gains or the milestones that are registered collectively is around programs that really work in creating change. And there are also research and evidence around understanding what the issues are, how they manifest, how they happen, and what leads to them, and also understanding which approaches are more impactful and to creating that change. But there is also this shift around enabling environment from all directions that is really, really helping this work. Policy shifts, investment and funding have really grown until this year. So it has been like in a growth trajectory, which was really, really encouraging. And in the past one decade, we can confidently say prevention is preventable from violence is inevitable to violence is preventable. So it's a big, big leap, and we celebrate that. And I think Nikki has been highlighting some of the strategies that are tried and implemented towards this. I also want to highlight the work around community mobilization has really proven to be creating a lasting impact because it involves everyone, men, women, and institutions, leaders. It kind of brings everyone into one journey to a better future. So I can highlight one of our approaches that Raising Voices developed, and then that was piloted and evaluated using a randomized control trial. It's a community mobilization approach, and it has really shown encouraging result, reducing the risk of IPV, intimate partner violence, by 52%. So these are some of the things we really celebrate as we think about the work of gender equality in general and women empowerment in particular.
Thank you so much, Nats. And that's such an important insight, right? That prevention is worth investing in, right? That it needs to happen side by side with other forms of addressing gender-based violence. And but that work is so fragile, isn't it? All it takes is a political shift to then resources to go away, funding to be reduced, clawed back, and so forth. So here's the call to action. Let's focus on systems change as well. So let's get back to that point, actually. How do we work in systems change, and how do we move beyond interventions that are primarily focused on individual and behavior change to those that confront and change the systems and structures that lead to that kind of gender inequality and violence in the first place? And let's start with Calliope, because you've already touched on this, right? So what does that work look like? How do we shift from the work that focuses on behavior and individual change to those broader collective institutional systemic changes. And how is that different than the traditional awareness raising approaches? How do we address as well the current platform capitalism that prioritizes, patriarchal structures and decision making and leadership and all of that?
Thank you, Berto. This is such an important question. And I think you touched the heart of the issue, that if we don't have structural changes, we're not going to address the root causes of the structural power imbalances that we see that really create violence against women and girls. So I think it's very, very important. I talked a little bit about the need to address the gender inequalities across laws and policies. I think that would be very important. But of course, having legal and policy frameworks, the enabling environment that Nansen referred to as well, it's important because it creates a social norms change on its own with the process to change the laws and policies. But at the same time, we need to have the budget and the resources to implement them. And that's a little bit the structural change has to do with the implementation as well. When we have to deal with the justice and the law enforcement sectors that they need to enforce the laws and policies, very often they are male-dominated sectors. So how do we work with the sectors that they need to implement the laws and policies, for example, to have women reporting to the police, to have justice moving forward with the cases. So it's very important to do this kind of work. One other point I would like to refer to when we talk about institutions, it's not only governments and the institutions, the sectors that they need to implement these legal and policy frameworks, but we have to deal with, and Nikki talked about it a little bit, about religious and traditional leaders, that they are an important institution and they play an important role in communities and in different contexts. And how do we work with them to address the social norms in their own context? And then what we have seen from our experiences, other male-dominated sectors, for example, the transportation sector, that they address safety of women and girls. When we work with them, and as an institution, we manage to change not only the policies internally on how to be addressing violence within their own institution, but also how they consider safety of women and girls when they build the transportation system, for example, things that they haven't thought about it before. Or the sports sector. The sports sector, how can we use it as well at institutional level to address social norms by demonstrating concrete male models, for example, and working with them? Or, for example, the media sector, I think it's a sector that we haven't explored enough yet. About how we can engage structurally with them in order to address the social norms and the power imbalances. And maybe I can talk a little bit more about it later when we get into more detailed questions, but just some framing reflections from my side. Thank you.
So great, right? Like that top-bottom approach, bottom-up approach, right? Like working with leaders to change the policies in their institutions, in their systems, not only change policies, but create new policies that are rooted in equity and equality and safety for women and girls across these different male-dominated sectors and institutions. Thank you for that. And Nikki, you touched on this a little bit as well, like in terms of seeing those systems change in terms of care work, fatherhood, and so forth. Tell us more about that. How do we move from the individual to systems change in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've started to touch on some of those in terms of thinking about fatherhood and care, but obviously issues around leave are key and changing policies around that. And I think that particularly paternity leave, I think that's beginning to change. But I think that all these changes, as Calliope was saying, need to be within a kind of broader, held within a broader perspective. So, for example, we used to talk about engaging men to help or support women. And that was a very individual and kind of quite paternalistic approach. So, shifting from individual attitude change, which still needs to happen, but to critical interrogation of masculinities and patriarchal power, to emphasis on accountability and healing and redistribution of power. So it's taking a broader lens. So I think next we were talking about community justice and community solutions. I think instead of carceral solutions, we need to look at what's transformative. How can we involve the community in those justice systems? And I think Calliope is actually absolutely right. The transport system, the justice system, the health system, the education system, all of those, we need to really think about how you can kind of look at the laws, look at the policies, look at the practices, and look at the social norms, and the kind of cultural transformation that needs to kind of be carried out. And there's all sorts of innovative and interesting projects around using art, using tech, to try and push back on this, to try and work on prevention. And thinking about impact in a different way, perhaps. So we do talk much more now about survivors rather than victims, but involving survivors in defining outcomes in structural change, and building alternative platforms. They already exist to a certain extent, but feminist community-owned tech infrastructures that prioritize care, consent, collective governance, not just profit. So I think it's a kind of whole shift in thinking that is beginning to happen in lots of different places. And I think that's really exciting. And that's what's really going to start changing things, I think.
I love this. I love this because we're starting to paint this big holistic picture. I can, picture in my mind all of these different gears, changing at different levels, from the institution to the community, to the family, to the individual. Because even in the context of fatherhood, we can help men change their perceptions there and understand the importance of taking time and playing a role in raising their kids. But if they have to go to work, soon after their child is born or after a child arrives in their family, because the policy at work doesn't allow them to take the time, then we got to change those policies as well. So those are really such great examples. Thank you for that. So Natsnat, you talked about this too at the community level. So how do we change from individual, collective behaviors and norms to systems level type of norms change at the community level and beyond?
Thank you. Yeah, I think awareness raising that are aiming at engaging individuals and collective are the first steps of the greater transformation. I think we are all recognizing the values that they could bring, but the problem is when initiatives and programs kind of see it as the final destination. So we all have to really critically reflect how we are enabling that individual attitude shift is translated into action, into behaviors. So it could be individual, it could be collective behaviors. In a way, the behaviors and also action, in a way, they are reflected in the norms, systems, and structures. So yeah, you mentioned around social norm change. It's very critical because one, that is how we sustain change we have created. And then that's also a way to really nurture and ensure whatever change is happening is spreading, and it's like building a new norm, a new tradition, a new culture that is positive and that is empowering. So yeah, what I mentioned around community mobilization, even if when we are looking at community engagement, we should really be thinking about how are we engaging the regular members of the community. And how are we engaging leaders? How are we leveraging their power and influence to creating the change? First, to creating change, like individual change, because change starts with us before we go and try to change others. And then how are also our institutions transforming to encourage and inspire positive way of living and building a positive engagement and relationship across the board. So it's very, very important. And we should have programs that are really, really designed with gender power analysis. I think Calliope was trying to get us to think about the root causes. And we all agree the root cause of violence against women is power imbalance. And if we can't really do gender power analysis, we will not be able to design interventions, programs, and strategies that can lead us to a more transformative impact. So that is the key. I also understand how change happens. It's not a straight line. It's like one step, 2 steps forward, and then maybe one step back. So also pausing, having intervals to pause and see, okay, what is emerging? How is the change creation rolling out? What do we need to change? How can we modify it to really achieve the results we have in heart?
Awesome point. So the need to pause, evaluate, we're constantly being impacted with new forms of technologies, new forms of violence and inequality. So we have to continuously evolve. But I think you made a really good point about the need to amplify this change, right? And this goes back to your earlier point about resources and having the resources, because so much of this work is small scale, it's localized. We need to amplify it, we need to scale it up. And for that, we need to have more resources, more investment in prevention. So let's go to Sergio next. What do you think, Sergio? How do we move from individual change to systemic change in the work that you do?
Essa é uma pergunta muito complexa e filosófica. Daria para ficar uma manhã toda aqui. E agradeço as pessoas que me precederam, porque elas semearam assim muitas coisas importantes. A primeira reflexão que eu faço é como conscientizar uma pessoa, um homem, que está no topo do poder. Quem vai abrir? Se eu estou no topo do poder, eu vou abrir mão dos meus privilégios? Eu vou entender que isso é bom para mim? Se eu estou na estrutura piramidal, lá em cima, eu vou olhar para baixo e falar: ó, vocês precisam de políticas públicas para chegar onde eu estou? Então, eu acho muito bom falar dessa situação para quem não está no poder, para quem não está, né, no processo de dominação. Porque é uma coisa muito complicada, né? A gente muda indivíduos sem mudar a estrutura, muda estrutura sem mudar indivíduos. É como tentar ensinar alguém a nadar se não tem um rio, um lago, uma piscina. É preciso localizar primeiro aonde está esse lago, aonde está essa piscina, para a pessoa poder entender que ela pode frequentar esse lago, esse rio, esse mar. É interessante notar que, dentro dessa perspectiva do indivíduo versus estrutura, existe um abismo muito grande, porque existe uma lógica da dominação que mantém a estrutura de poder, que mantém esse lugar do privilégio e lugar da dominação. E eu venho aprendendo nas minhas práticas, e acho que é importante isso discutir, Como subverter as narrativas que sustentam esse poder? Como produzir estruturas curriculares, escolares, acadêmicas, nas redes sociais, nos padrões de publicidade, na mídia, na inteligência artificial, que questiona esse lugar natural do poder. Existe um processo, e talvez todos aqui conheçam e já ouviram falar de Paulo Freire, e que hoje é dia do professor aqui no Brasil. Saudação a todas as professoras e professores que estão aqui nesse espaço, que é uma conscientização do indivíduo enquanto estrutura desse processo coletivo. É impossível pensar uma mudança cultural somente com leis punitivas, com leis que tornam o ato da violência um ato individual. Eu acho que isso mostra por que aqui no Brasil vem crescendo o feminicídio, vem crescendo a violência, o estupro, a violência sexual contra crianças, contra adolescentes, que a gente não consegue, e de certa forma, pensar essa relacionalidade. A estrutura determina o indivíduo e o indivíduo também reforça a estrutura. Eu tenho a impressão, e é só uma impressão, que a gente precisa criar, né, uma estratégia onde o indivíduo entenda que ele faz parte dessa estrutura, mas que ele não muda somente sozinho. Ele se muda em comunhão com a coletividade. E essa estrutura de poder isola quem está no topo dessa pirâmide social. Então, mostrar para a gente e mostrar dentro dos trabalhos já realizados e dentro de políticas públicas que essa transformação ela é dialógica. O indivíduo muda a estrutura, mas também a estrutura contamina o indivíduo. E é preciso, então, que a gente, no embate com quem está no poder, quem está definindo as políticas públicas, nas redes sociais, nas comunidades, nos influenciadores digitais, porque quando o influenciador digital lança uma moda, isso se pulveriza com uma rapidez muito grande. E ali está o modelo de masculinidade. E ali está o modelo do patriarcado. Então, minha pergunta é: como, né, criar, né, ações para que a gente pulverize melhor nesse novo modelo de uma masculinidade mais humana? Minha pergunta é essa, Humberto.
It's a good question, Sergio, and I think we could spend the entire day talking about that in particular. And yeah, thank you for reminding us that, we have to have that end goal clear for everyone. Why are we doing this? We have to convince individuals and institutions and communities and families and systems that it's worthwhile us working towards that end goal. So telling people how to swim, where to swim to that lake is important. I'm going to truncate the next few questions into one, and I'm going to ask our panelists to be quick. Just highlight one thing perhaps that you have done or that you think needs to be done in this work. And that is, how do we, and some of you have already talked about this by centering, for example, survivor voices in this work, but how do we continue to root the work to engage men and boys in feminist principles and movements? How do we intersect that work with broader social justice movements? And how do we do that in an inclusive way? For example, how do we use language that is inclusive, that steers us away from leaving people behind? So how do we do that in an equitable way given that we are all working towards towards promoting equality, removing discrimination, removing violence, knowing that this discrimination, this inequality, this violence disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable in our society. So how do we do that? Let's start with Nikki.
Well, you spoiled my plan, Umberto. I was going to answer those three questions one after the other, but yeah. I mean, our next question was going to be about accountability, and I'm not just plugging Men Engaged, but I use that accountability framework that Men Engaged produced a lot, because it seems to me that it has a code of conduct, it has different component parts, and accountability seems to me to be absolutely key here. We talk a lot about being accountable to feminism, feminist groups, to women's organizations in this field. But how do we actually do that? How do we really root what we're doing in a kind of accountable practices? And if we're thinking about it in terms of the kind of violence prevention, violence sector, we've been talking about transformative justice systems. We're talking about community accountability circles, restorative practices, organizational audits, long-term commitments in writing to anti-oppression values. Sergio was talking earlier about the kind of whole decolonization agenda and the intersectional agenda that's absolutely part of that. But I'm also conscious all the time when we're working on these issues that often we're talking to each other. I mean, I suspect most of the people on this webinar are doing this kind of work and are already engaged. I'm really concerned about how we talk to a wider group, and that might mean using different kind of language, not losing the idea of accountability, but using language that people understand, and becoming less binary. I feel as though our world is becoming more binary. There's those of us who are progressive, and there are increasing numbers of people who are not progressive. And where's the space in between? I'm really interested in the spaces in between. And that's the place where maybe things can shift, and maybe we can think about accountability and think about brave conversations. I think came up a lot during COVID. I think uncomfortable conversations among ourselves, but also with other people. I'll stop there, but I'll come back a bit later.
A key principle, isn't it, in all the work we do, accountability. So how are we accountable to those social justice movements, to the feminist movement? How do we integrate that into all the work that we do? And yes, how do we work through and those uncomfortable, but they don't have to be uncomfortable questions, that we can just break the stigma, break the taboo. Let's open those conversations up and do it in an honest, genuine, kind, compassionate, inclusive way. So let's go to Natsnat next. How do we do this in accountable ways, as Nikki says?
Thank you. Maybe I should kind of make it very close. This morning I was in conversation in a feminist circle for organizations in Uganda who meet regularly to think about this issue, like what does accountability to women mean? And in context of our conversation, this conversation involving men and boys, there were some recognitions that are real to our context in Uganda. We all realize there is this victimhood competition. Recently, we are hearing a lot about, what about boys? And some members of the Men Engaged are also pushing this agenda. And we reflected a bit on how much of gender power analysis is informing the work, especially the work around involving boys and men. So we still have that concern, and we also recognize the disconnect. There is no consultation. If we are trying to uphold accountability to women or feminist movement, there should be some sort of communication and conversation and connection. It doesn't really exist. No consultation at the start, in the middle, or the program at the end of the programs. So coming as a full blast backlash in our context. And that's not the intention of, I think, involving men and boys, but it's taking a different course. And yeah, we talked about language. I think Nikki mentioned from a inclusion angle, but also language that replicates patriarchal idea. How like champions, men champions doing this program is very common in our context. So maybe taking audit of our programs. Are they really driving the intention? Are they driving us to get to the intended destination? So those are some of the things that we have recognized, and it's very active in our context. We felt like accountability needs to be picked up by the men engaged community in Uganda. And I also believe that similar things are happening in other countries.
Good reminder, Natsnat. Accountability, let's make it, let's amplify it, make it more broadly. Let's make sure that people at the local level understand and globally understand and are able to commit to it as well. And yes, let's consult with those who are most affected by this inequality, but not just consult, let's involve and let's partner with that. Let's stand side by side, right? In the Canadian Indigenous communities, there is this concept of nothing for us without us, right? So let's apply that in our work, right? Nothing for us without us, meaning that we have to collaborate and work with, partner with, and support, stand side by side with those who are most impacted by this violence. Thank you so much. Sérgio, como se diz accountability em português? Vamos começar com essa definição.
Muito provocativo, né, Humberto? Muito provocativo. Mas fico feliz de estar aqui escutando tantas mulheres aí e tantas experiências. Aqui eu trago a responsabilização dentro de um plano ético de entender e compreender a alteridade. Porque também há um risco aqui no Brasil de alguns grupos de homens se juntarem dentro de um vitimismo e falar que o feminismo está machucando a honra masculina. A responsabilidade do qual eu trabalho nos grupos é uma responsabilidade de descentralização do poder. É um exercício de estar presente, mas não tomar a frente das mulheres. Deixar, né, a responsabilização é um processo de transformar-se pela escuta e pela ação solidária. Há algumas dinâmicas que fazemos com os homens, quando a gente quer desenvolver o processo de responsabilização, em que é baseado no processo de testemunho. O que você quer testemunhar para outro homem? Para quebrar o ciclo, aqui a gente tem uma expressão da broderagem, de ser brother, de passar a mão na cabeça do outro. Ah, é assim mesmo. Então a gente, primeiro, o processo de responsabilização, ele rompe com esse vínculo perverso do afetivo. Homens ajudando a homens a serem homens contra as mulheres maldosas. Então, eu tenho que trabalhar essa minha perspectiva de responsabilização como um processo político, um processo político. Ou seja, que esses homens entendam que quando eles entram em um processo de reflexão sobre sua condição, eles não estão numa situação de vítimas, né? Que esse processo é um instrumento político criado dentro do feminismo e que nós, homens, podemos utilizar desse feminismo para a gente se libertar das nossas próprias inseguranças, frustrações e descentralizar o lugar do poder. Eu entendo também que o processo de responsabilização é um processo de cocriação, de validação de novos valores. A responsabilização, ela traz, seguramente, né, uma pauta para esses homens sobreviventes do próprio patriarcado, e eu crio, então, homens insurgentes. Na verdade, o efeito dessa responsabilização, dessa responsabilidade, é criar homens que se insurgem diante desses valores. E assim, né, eu consigo trabalhar o tema responsabilidade, não como culpa, não como culpa, mas como responsabilidade de entrar num novo processo histórico. Obrigado, Roberto.
Thank you so much, Sergio. I want to draw everyone's attention to the discussion that's happening on the chat. There's some really great resources being shared, research studies as well. So please head over there as well. And there was one question in particular that I thought was really great that perhaps we can quickly take on, which was shared by Vanessa Lovera de Bone. From your perspective and work, what is the single biggest victory or evidence of success that proves gender transformative work with men and boys is actually creating sustained change? And I'm going to start with Calliopa. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up names now. And ask you to, answer both the previous question in terms of how do we do this in an accountable way, and how is UN Women doing that, and also how do we demonstrate a change, evidence for change that this is working.
Thank you so much. And indeed, Calliope is a complicated Greek name, so no offense there. And indeed, I checked the chat box, such interesting reflections and such interesting findings of research that I wasn't aware of, like the research of a PhD student, and showing, for example, around the parental leave and the reduction of violence. And I'm saying that because there's so much out there that I don't think we have really done a lot of research in order to see what would be really effective, although we have made very big progress. As Nasnet said, now we can say that violence is preventable, right? And regarding the evidence, I don't think, Umberto and colleagues, we can say that just one intervention can be the magic bullet and solve problems of structural inequalities that they have been existing for centuries and made violence being embedded, making it so entrenched into societies and beliefs and norms. So we need to have a mix of interventions at different levels, and all of us we have been talking about, addressing the structural causes, having the frameworks, and then working at both personal and community level to address the root causes. But I think it's important if we want to see sustainable results, because we can have an intervention that reduces violence in 2 years, for example, in more than 50%, but how is that sustained in the longer term? And how can we scale up that it doesn't happen just in 10 communities in one country, but we identify the ingredients of success to adapt them in different contexts? I think that would be the next frontier, how we scale up these successful interventions we saw at community level, but we need a more comprehensive approach. And we need, Umberto, to find governments and communities where they are. I don't think they all have the same understanding even of what prevention intervention should be about. So there is a lot of work that we need to do with our partners to communicate that and to communicate about the evidence. Just regarding that, very, very quickly around accountability. And already Nikki, Nancy, and Sergio raised so many important points. If I can say very, very quickly, it's important to show that it's not competition between men and women here. As Sergio was saying, we all benefit from work around gender equality. We have seen right now, and there have been many studies and research, how gender inequality, these really harmful gender stereotypes and beliefs around men and how they need to behave, and the beliefs they hold around women, it harms themselves as well. And we know that about the impact it has on mental health, physical health, and this is very important. So I think language is very, very important, how we shift the narrative. And I really liked, Nikki, what you said, the spaces in between. I think as a field, we need to do a bit more around that, and how we use language to reach out to the non-converted ones. We often tend to speak to each other, to talk to each other a lot. And this is important because also there are a lot of different views among ourselves. But how do we reach out? How do we reach out to men and boys that they are not there yet? And I think the digital platforms, technology can play an important role, and to see how we can use technologies and digital platforms as well to address the otherness that Sergio was talking about, and to reach out to groups that we were not able to reach out to through the traditional interventions that we had in place. And I don't know if we will have time to touch upon that, but I think there are already some successful interventions through digital platforms that we can address social norms. And for UN Women, we really want to explore that a little bit more with all of you on how we can explore a bit more. And we work with the Equimudum and engage a lot to figure these things out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Calliope. And yeah, let's do this work together, because this is complex and this is nuanced, and what may work in one side of the world may not necessarily work in another. But on the subject of technology, and because technology and social media and platforms can be definitely challenging sites of violence, inequality, discrimination, radicalization, so many of those things, but they can also open the doors for new approaches, new ways of doing this work. So one challenge to all panelists: in 1 minute, can you please share the one approach that you think is key in addressing, preventing sexual and gender-based violence through technology, in particular as it relates to working with men and boys? 1 minute, one quick round amongst all of you. And so answer that question, and also share some very quick, what is one key takeaway from our dialogue today for you in terms of how do we do this in a more impactful way? How do we work with men and boys in a more impactful way, more so than more so than in the past? So let's start with Natsna.
Thank you, Umberto. I would love to share my dilemma, or the tension I see as we think of technology facilitated GBV or online violence. Yes, I recognize this is a new form of violence, more of like an extension of what we experience in an offline space or in person. So as this thing emerge, I get some concern, like, are we going to kind of debate and focus on technology facilitated discussion, or we're going to build this into our current analysis, current work, and address it as one? So this is a question. I don't know what is what, because collectively this is a question for us. So I want to put it out on the table as my takeaway or giveaway.
Wonderful. That is a really great question. Are we going to focus on it, or are we going to make it part of our broader efforts? Thank you so much. Sergio, what do you think? What is the one key takeaway, and what is the most impactful way we can address these issues through technology?
Eu compartilhei essa questão há algum tempo, logo depois da preparação, com meu filho. Então, quem deveria estar sentado aqui nesse momento é meu filho. Mas ele me disse algumas coisas bem importantes sobre isso. Primeiro, transparência. Transparência algorítmica e auditoria independente. É necessário que as grandes redes, a gente tenha acesso, elas sejam transparentes através de relatórios. Uma outra coisa, limitar a monetização do discurso de ódio. Então, toda vez que tiver discurso de ódio, tem que bloquear, patrocinar, agir lá na raiz, lá no fundamento, né? Lá na questão financeira. Então, se tem um chat, uma plataforma que ganha dinheiro com discurso de ódio, e contra isso daí. E também, segundo ele, que é uma coisa que é possível fazer também, é fazer um novo design contra o virality tóxico, essa virilização tóxica das coisas. Então, é possível limitar, é possível ter uma inteligência agindo para o bem. Então, eu agradeço a ele porque eu conversei com ele essa semana hoje. Como é que é o mundo? Então, ele trabalha nesse mundo, assim, fluido, moderno e tal. Então, ele falou que muita gente ganha dinheiro com discurso de ódio, com discurso homofóbico, com discurso misógino. É preciso interferir nessas plataformas. Ponto, esse é meu ponto.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Hate speech is not free speech, right? So thank you for that reminder. Calliope, over to you.
So just answering to Sergio, who creates the algorithms and who benefits from that, and how do we need to have more women into these platforms that it's a small percentage right now to also be shaping these algorithms that consequently shaping what you have described so beautifully, Sergio. I think that would be important. Also, answering to Natsnet, you raise such an important question. We cannot be focusing just on online violence, ignoring that this is a continuum of violence happening for women and girls, men and boys. So, but we cannot ignore the fact that technology and digital platforms right now intensified so much the norms, and they are creating new norms around misogyny and harmful practices around women, and the phenomenon of the manosphere, and how this is really linked with extreme radicalization. I think it creates new notions that we cannot really ignore. But I agree 100% with you, Natsnet, that we cannot be focusing and treating as an isolated form of violence, because it is not. Just a few reflections from my side.
Wonderful. Key reflections. Thank you for sharing those. Nikki, last but not least.
I think some of our participants have given some of the answers and questions that we could also give. Thank you. So thank you so much for that discussion on the chat. Very briefly, I mean, this work takes time. All men are different as well as women are different, so we really need to think about that contextuality. And you know, we need programming, we need research, we need advocacy. And honestly, this isn't going to be changed by us. So, you know, we really need to build alliances. There's a wonderful feminist organization called Take Back the Tech that some of you may know. Building alliances online and offline with people who are doing this work in a grounded, community-oriented way, but also from the top in terms of policy, feels to me to be really important. And I'm wondering about work with influencers. My niece goes out with an influencer. I'm not even quite sure how that works or what that means, but you know, I'm not that generation, but that seems to me we need to be thinking creatively about who we work with, as well as what Sergio is saying about how we work and the principles behind it. And I guess finally, yeah, my point at the beginning, the opposite to violence is care. So let's think about that really carefully in a granular way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you so much to our amazing panelists who have shared deep insights with us, from centering accountability to partnering with technology, partnering with, collaborating, supporting, doing everything with survivors and those who are most impacted by this violence, doing it in an accountable, rooted way with feminist principles and social justice movements, using a life cycle approach. Start young with boys and young men, enable the environments, right? Invest in prevention, change norms at the community level, at the family level, individual, at the systems and institutional level. We can't do this work in isolation. Let's do it together with male-dominated sectors, with faith leaders, with sports, with using a gender transformative approach always. And let's work to decolonize, work with men and boys, and decolonize our field altogether. So my gratitude again to this brilliant panel, to Natsnat, to Sergio, to Calliope, to Nikki, for your insight, your wisdom, and the amazing work that you do. And so thank you again for joining us. Thank you to our audience. And I would like to now pass it on to Amrita Kapoor who will wrap it up for us. Hello, Amrita, welcome.
Thanks, Humberto. It's a pleasure to join you. And thank you so much for to the panelists for really thoughtful reflections. And I love how the conversation actually started with what's been working, because I think there's a lot around where the challenges are. So it's been very humbling to be able to listen to some of the work on the ground. I think the other reason I'm really grateful to be part of this conversation, to listen to the panelists and the questions, is because some of you may know Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. It's the world's oldest women's peace organization, celebrating its 110th anniversary this year. And a number of years ago, we started our stream of work on mobilizing men for feminist peace. And that's how we became involved in the community of practice and in the Men Engage Alliance. And so in my previous professional experiences, have been engaged in this space in different ways. But I think just in terms of speaking to some of the issues that have come up, I will just briefly address a few issues. The first one is the value of the intersectional approach. And I think this goes to some of the comments in the chat as well, is that really when we look at this question about the group being not monolithic, but also what are the intersecting characteristics that then influence the power dynamics, and similarly on the other side, influence the sense of security or insecurity. And this is, of course, what is likely to then inspire violence, or their proclivity to violence or not. And so this intersectional approach is not just about recognizing the different systems and the different characteristics, but also what prompts self-reflection or awareness of privilege and power, and recognizing that will be different across different groups and in different communities. So the entry points will actually come from this intersectional approach around how do you have these conversations in different ways. And this will speak a little bit to one of the other points I want to mention about where has it worked in different spaces. And so secondly, looking at speaking to those outside our echo chamber, I think we are living in an increasingly polarized world. And that means that it is harder to find spaces where people are willing to be confronted. And ultimately, that's what accountability is. It's a form of being confronted and being open to that. So this challenge of talking to each other and then finding ways to talk to those who don't want to hear this message in a way that speaks to accountability is indeed the crux of the challenge. And broadening this transition, which I love your second question, between the individual community to the structural change, because that accountability actually does need to be embedded in institutions and something that is acted upon, because it is about when things don't go right. And so I think there's that interplay there. So then I think looking at how do we engage with that, and that's part of this life cycle, starting early in terms of prevention, is looking at different forms of masculinity and uplifting those that demonstrate different forms of security and identity, and that challenge those dominant narratives. And I know many of you work in this space, so I won't cover that in any more detail. There's a lot to be said. But I think leads me to this point around some of the recent engagement. I was in Amman for a regional convening on the WPS agenda, and in there, in that sort of convening, it included a couple of events, including the launch of a toolkit on militarized masculinities. And the reason I mention this is because I'm thinking about how do we uplift different narratives. And one of the ways that came up from this was actually looking at men who have tried and potentially succeeded at those different forms of power and dominance in a patriarchal world, and who've rejected it, who turn around. And I think in militarized context, what I find really interesting is who are the men who are saying this doesn't solve the problem? Who are the men who are saying we need to go beyond this zero-sum game? Some of you are talking about that zero-sum game, and have turned around that path. And the reason I mention that is because it's at one extreme. And then, of course, the other extreme is this question of care. And I loved what you said, Nikki, about care being the opposite of violence, because I found that Spanish statistic really interesting as well, that men who engage in parental care, that is a reduction. And I actually just feel this goes to transcending the conditioning and the zero-sum game. We all lose out when men don't get to engage in that type of relationship. And so if that is something, and this leads me to my final point around where are the sources, and so many of you have got those solutions, but I'm looking for other spaces that are more challenging. How can we find those alternative allies who can speak in those spaces, right? So that we expand beyond the echo chamber and find others who have that legitimacy to speak to others. And I'm speaking in a pragmatic way here, because that's who will be listened to. So whether it's soldiers or commanders who say, this is awful and we need to do radically nonviolent things, or whether it's men in leadership positions who have had that engaged relationship of care and can speak to why does this matter more, who can speak to transcending this zero-sum game. And I think the other piece I want to mention is just those intersecting structures that we see in conflict as well, because we see that in a more extreme form. So in some ways, if we can take lessons from there and we can apply it in places where the same structures exist, but they're not as extreme in terms of the fueling of violence, then I feel like maybe that transference is going to be something that will help us. So I hope those are a few thoughts reflecting on some of the themes that the panelists mentioned. But just to say, it's been a real privilege to listen in to the discussion, and thank you so much for having me join and be able to contribute in this way.
Thank you. Thank you on behalf of the Global Secretariat team and as well as the GBV working group. Thank you all for staying with us, listening and joining in conversation on this very important piece or the session in this series. And definitely this is not the end. We will continue creating and bringing all of you together for more conversation, dialogue with each other, and sharing some of the examples of work that we are doing in or we see as promising examples that are showcasing some of the things that came up today on how can this work become more transformative, more accountable, more meaningful, and that be done as a collective together rather than these isolated areas of work or any sense of competition of the work, because ultimately it is moving towards the same vision, so same goal that we are all working towards. So yeah, thank you to Natne, Sergio, Nikki, and Calliope for sharing your insights, thoughts, and wisdom, and for such a candid conversation as well. It was really helpful. Thank you to Humberto as well for such a great moderation of the session and great job on navigating the conversation and generate these insights to find strategies on making this work more accountable, more transformative, and more meaningful. And across all the spectrums, like whether we are talking about the online, offline spectrum or gender and sexual identities and spectrums around those, and so on. So how do we really make it a little more comprehensive as well? And thank you, Viju, for your opening remarks on behalf of the working group, and Amrita for your wisdom and the way you connected things and added a bit more of a militarization aspect in this big mix of the conversation, and really, complementing to that, and really with that addition. And I think we believe, we are heading towards the objective that we had initially thought for the session. But we also realize that it is with the 3 sessions, I don't think we will be able to cover everything we wanted to do. So that's hence the reason for continuing creating this space for more conversations, so that we can actually look at how can those who are doing the work on men and masculinities, as we call it, can be more meaningfully contributing to systemic approach to prevention and ending of sexual and gender-based violence in its full spectrum of online, offline spaces and gender and sexual identities, as I said. Also, we can't end the session without really expressing our gratitude to our amazing interpreters. Without you, I think we won't be able to communicate, even talk and discuss. So thank you really for your support with the interpretation and translation support. And also for everyone who kept sharing amazing questions, your resources here. Let's continue doing that, and we commit to continue creating these spaces more as we move forward.